All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me this morning for our lesson 10 Q&A. So the last Q&A for this class, and we're going to be going through some of the requirements for this assignment. We'll show you some examples. I've got student examples to show you. I have a couple of examples from my own work that I can show you, and we'll try and give everybody a really good idea of what the expectations are for the final assignment here. Maybe what we'll do to start is just take a look at the actual discussion board. That's very unusual. Okay, we'll see if that works. I don't know. Can anybody see what's on the screen there? Okay, yeah, it's not, tell you what, I'm just gonna stop sharing this and try again. Don't know why it's not. All right. Here we go. So we are looking at lesson 10's discussion board here. And as you know, we've got two parts to the assignment. One being the local network survey, which I believe is pretty straightforward, but we'll go through that. And then we're going to look at the final assignment, which is your concept design or concept plan. So if we look at the local network survey first, I think this is pretty straightforward. We just want you to take a look at like-minded groups and people in your area, and any instructors or mentors or designers or farmers that you might be able to reach out to at a later date. And I guess in some way we're looking at also any active design or design build companies that you've got there. So this is only worth 4 points, but it is a nice way to finish off the course, just knowing what resources are out there and around in your area, because for many of you that want to take this and perhaps do more design work, perhaps make a career out of this in your future, knowing all the resources in your area is really an important part of that. And I know when I went through my PDC years ago, you come out of it all fired up and ready to go, and then it can be a little bit confusing how to move forward with that. So this is a good part of that assignment to go through. And again, it's worth 4 points. But the main event that we are going to be looking at today is the concept plan. And this has all been work that we've been building up to. So of course you have your existing site plan or base plan, and we're going to want to see that. And then we're going to want to see the concept plan as a whole, your mission statement, some of the goals that were assigned to the drawing, some of the proposed zones and pathway map, which are often different than your existing zones. And very important, this water management plan and map, and the soil fertility map and strategies, and then how that might get phased in, which is actually a really important step in designing, is knowing, okay, once you have all those ideas put on paper, how does that get phased in, and what is a realistic budget for that? And that in itself can be quite tricky. And then we want to hear about at least five principles that were utilized. And then, of course, the social permaculture and SWOT analysis. So this is a pretty in-depth final assignment. But I think given all of the work that everybody has done leading up to this, it's kind of a natural progression and you can take a lot of that earlier work and just build on it. For some of you looking for any resources, there are some here, some tips on crafting your vision statement, and some of the goal overviews here. So these are definitely worth reviewing. That resource tab. And then, of course, we go to the rubric. So this, of course, is what we're going to base all your marks on. So as long as you are including what's being asked for here, there should be no problem getting full marks for your assignment. And that may or may not be important to you. So let us take a look at a couple of examples here. So got a student example that you can take a look at. That's in the module section of the platform. And this is just an example of local network survey and some designers, illustrators, and right here we've got some nurseries. So this is a great little page there. And that, of course, that part of the assignment is pretty brief. But the main event, of course, is the concept plan. So this is where we're going to pull in a lot of your work from previous weeks, as well as building on this a little bit. So we can see the concept plan. Now, this example may not be, that may not include all the things that we've asked for, because like I've said before, we have changed the template just slightly over the last couple of courses. So here you can see that we don't have, no, we don't. So in here, we do not have a base plan. So that's, if we go back, oops. Sorry, I can't see all my tabs here. If we go back to the concept plan and what's being asked for, we definitely want to see the existing plan. So it's just a matter of copying and pasting in your site plan or your base plan into that first sheet. And then the concept is exactly that. What is the overall intention of your design? And in this case, this is actually a nice way of doing it, where we have the base plan sort of diminished. So it is in a grayed out format. And then all those new elements have been dropped here in color. So that makes it really easy to see what some of those new intentions are. There's some good labeling here. It's always nice to see all these, well, we call these call outs. These are all aligned nicely, so graphically it looks really neat and clean. And then, of course, there's some very interesting elements within the drawing here. There is a legend that relates to the base plan, and then all the pertinent information, your scale bar, the north arrow, the location, and the name and the designer's name. So those are some important items to include. And if we go to the next section here, we're looking at design goals and the proposed zones. So this is always a really interesting part of the design, is just to see how this concept has affected the proposed zones versus the existing ones. And sometimes that can be quite subtle, and in other instances, it can be a little more dramatic, depending on the existing conditions. But in this case, it's pretty obvious. So we want a statement of purpose. So there's always a reason that you're creating the design. And just a kind of broad overall purpose and mission statement, and then some of these specific goals that are really helpful. So here there was privacy and an increase in diversity and native beneficials. So that's great to see. There's a note here about some of the changes to the proposed zones. So that's very interesting. And then, of course, some images. So this one sheet tells you quite a bit about this person's drawing. Okay, so that is the concept plan. And if anybody has any questions as we're going along, please don't hesitate to ask them in the chat or put your hand up and we'll answer those right away. Let's see here. So the next sheet that was included was a water management plan. So as you'll see, when my wife and myself, our company, when we do a design, it's slightly different, but we definitely prioritize water. And I would encourage anybody continuing with this kind of work to also really, dial into that with all the drawings. And we really feel that drives the landscape. But again, this has some really good elements within it. And this is 2 pages. The person couldn't fit all of this information on one page. So there's some notes here for rainwater catchment, for slowing down water using the gray water, and some micro irrigation, a little bit of earthworks. And then a note here about an existing pond and a level gate for the rain garden. I haven't taken a look at this. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to do. I'll have to take a look at that in more depth. And then the drawing itself with some nice labels here and some notes. So one of the things I always try and do is set up a design sheet so that if nobody knows the site, they are able to navigate through the drawing as best they can with clear drawing, clear labels, and these notes here. So without explanation, we can tell quite a bit here. We can see the water flows. We can see the intention of a swale, some irrigation expansion. There's a large rainwater collection system here that then overflows into I believe, a berm or a pond. So there's a lot of really interesting items in here, and that's great to see. Now, of course, on acreage, you can do more with your resources. But one of the things that I hope that people are taking away from the course is, with regards to water management, is to interconnect all of your strategies. So it's great to harvest rainwater, but what happens when that system has been filled? Where does the overflow go? Because that's a huge resource, and certainly on the coast, more so up the coast where rainfalls are higher in the winter, there is going to be quite a bit of overflow that people need to manage. And it is a resource and not a liability. So that is something that you want to consider. And again, we have some notes here. And then the next slide is we're looking at the soil fertility plan. And here, they're just, again, a very broad brush, so to speak, is being applied to increases in soil fertility. So instead of a silver bullet, sort of a one-shot approach, there's these multiple approaches, and this is great to see. This is going to make for a more resilient well, a more resilient approach to improving soil. So that's compost and how the mulching is going to be applied, composter itself, what to do with the kitchen garden waste, or sorry, kitchen garden intensively and lightly fertilized. So different approaches for different areas. And that's pretty much how I'm sure you'll see your project sites as well. So if you have a kitchen garden in zone 1, it's going to need a lot, well, A, it needs a lot more maintenance, but B, it's also going to require different soil management practices. If you're getting 2 or 3 crops a year out of your kitchen garden, so you're extracting all these crops, you're going to want to really think about how you can add back to the soil all of that biomass that you're removing. Then we go on to the phasing and the budget, and this can be pretty tricky, admittedly, but there are some obvious things, and often infrastructure is one of them. So any earthworks or your work on your water is often at the beginning of any project. Once you get to actually planting, in my, typically with our workflow, we're getting towards the end of the project. These other items come first. And mainly because the planting is really like the icing on the cake. So you wouldn't want to beautify an area and then have to go and undo something or tear into it. So hence doing your infrastructure early. And yeah, so this is these are very interesting to go through and getting a rough sense of cost, right? So I'm finding right now with projects we're involved with that cost is changing rapidly, and projects that one project we quoted I guess about 4 weeks before we started the project. It was much higher than I thought it would be, and then it got approved. And as we rolled up to the beginning, we had to reprice it because we had materials that are being affected by the inflation that we're seeing, especially irrigation parts. Those are and fuel, so for trucking and getting materials. So again, this is a little bit dry and boring going through this, but it is a really useful exercise. And as you sort of, for those that are going to be designing in the future and want to do that, this is an important part to be able to offer your clients the ability to know what to do either for themselves if they're do-it-yourselfers, or if they want your assistance installing. Getting a handle on the logical phases plus some rough costing is a really good idea. And eventually, after you've done it a little while, you can almost start narrowing down these costs into per square foot values, right? So if you're creating 1,000 square feet of planting, odds are you might be able to nail us per square foot on that. And for us, we're probably starting in and around $10 a square foot, and it may be higher than that. So it's not any way to bid it by any means, but it does give you some rough ideas on how to go forward with that part of it. And that's probably one of the most challenging things about designing is coming up with beautiful drawings, or not necessarily a beautiful drawing, but this great idea, and then trying to determine how much that's going to cost. And that can be quite tricky. And that really goes way back to the I guess it was our first assignment where we went through the client questionnaire and seeing what their budget I won't say can handle, but certainly dialing into what's realistic for the client and what the design is going to be. Like after you've done it a while, you try and keep that in the back of your mind as you're designing. But again, that is a little bit tricky, and it does take a little bit of time to get used to that. All part of experience. So the last part of the assignment here, we're looking at principles and the social permaculture. So these are pretty straightforward. It's very interesting to see how some of these principles apply to the design you've done. And that's about it. So that is one of the student examples. I'm just going to pop over here to our Q&A document, so nobody has written any questions there. Is there any questions from anybody today so far?
Yeah, this is Mackenzie. Jamie, I have a question. I'm just wondering, are there resources on the website, all the videos and links and, things we've used throughout the course, are those going to be accessible to us after the course? Like, would we be able to still log in and access those resources after the finish of the class?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll have lifetime access. So as long as there's
great.
power on those servers, you'll be able to access them. Now, the
Great.
caveat there is you won't be able to make comments or ask questions. All of that is disabled, but yeah, you'll have.
Yeah, I was wondering if I should be saving them somewhere else on my computer, or if I'll be able to come back and get them whenever, in the future I might want to pick something out. So great, thank you.
Yeah, it's a pretty good deal that way, because there's some wonderful resources, and I'm sure in time you'll be able to, you might be involved in a project or your own project and think, I got to touch base with that video again and
exactly.
locate it, and then away you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. So does anybody else have any questions at this point?
Jamie, I've got a quick question. My design, I'm planning on putting in a lined pond, and I really don't know where to go to be able to start figuring out how much that's going to cost budget wise. It's not like I can contact an engineer and say that I have this concept plan that may not be put in for another couple years. How do I get that cost?
How big is the pond, Carly? Is it substantial?
It's pretty decent size. It's probably going to be roughly about 12 to 15 feet wide and maybe about 25 feet long. It's kind of a big teardrop shaped oval.
Is it for a specific use?
I'd say additional irrigation of the cider orchard that I've got proposed.
Okay. So it's going to be, are you planning to have it fairly deep then? Is that?
Yeah, I've got about 15 trees that I'm putting in with a key line system kind of going down my slope. And luckily my brother-in-law when it comes to electrical and plumbing and stuff, he does all of that on his own.
Right.
So he'll be able to put in the solar pump and everything else. It's just the actual digging out of the pond that we would want to have hired out. And it's a slope, it's sandy soil. I want a soil engineer or somebody to come in to actually do that portion of the earthworks project. And I just don't know how to start budgeting that out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of the answer to that, I would say, is your pond placement. And I haven't seen your drawing yet, and I'll make comments when I do see it, because that will directly affect your budget. So what do I mean by that? Well, like 15 by 25 or 15 by 30, that's not enormous. And if the area is well suited for it, you wouldn't need engineering or anything like that. Now, that's my opinion. If it's on, as you try and put these storage devices onto sloped ground, you can imagine you have, instead of a pond on a flat surface, you really don't have any retaining challenges. But as soon as that degree of slope goes up, you have a downhill, we'll call it a dam wall that you have to build. And you definitely want to do that correctly, right?
And that's kind of where I'm going, since my whole property is on a slope.
Right. So with ponds, the ideal placement of those is, I don't have a drawing to show you, but if you take a look at a slope, and it's often these slopes change. So you're going from a concave to a convex shape. And that's actually right in and around where there's, here, I'll try and get it for you. Sorry. It's very close to an area called the key point in the landscape. And those traditionally are the areas that are highest in the landscape that are appropriate for water storage. Let me try and find something here for you. Yeah, where's our water group? There we go. Or actually, maybe the keyline group would be better. Geography. There we go. So here's an example. It's hard to see, but on this contour map that's at the top of the page, you'll see it doesn't even matter whether these are 1 foot, 2 foot, 10 meter, whatever. But you'll notice there's a dot where the contours start to spread out. And that's where the land starts to flatten slightly. And those are the key, these are called key points. And these are, again, the highest points in the landscape where you'd want to store water. So if you were trying to store it higher up, you would be, potentially this project would, the cost of it would go way up. The safety would be of concern, right? Because you don't want to have a failure in a water storage area. Now, the upside is if you're lining it, that's great. You don't have any concerns about seepage and a dam wall letting go because it's been saturated, right? So if you can, consider that when you're looking at the topography of your landscape, you may discover that you don't have any appropriate place to put a pond. And in that case, you'd want to consider other forms of storage. What else can I do? My landscape at home here is very much like that. Let me see if I can quickly find yeah, I probably won't be able to quickly find anything here. There's so much information. Yeah, but that would be one thing I would do. So then the other is figuring out, okay, if you're going to store water and you have 15 trees, what are your watering requirements for those? How much water is going to be used every week during the growing season? So that's something to That's a rabbit hole to go down, and that'll be a little bit dependent on the type of trees. So if you have moisture loving items, you know that's going to require more, but that is information you can usually access fairly easily. And then you look at the pond itself. Let's say, just punching numbers quickly here, let's say you're at 15 by 25, I believe was a number you said. So we get our area, and then let's say you make it 5 feet deep. Oops. Sorry, I'm going to do this in meters. Well, it's a good thing I'm not doing any calculations today. So let's say you're 5 meters wide by, well, we'll just round things off, 5 by 10, and we're going to be 2 meters deep. Yeah, I don't know why this isn't working. That's very unusual. Ah, there I go. Now I figured it out. So if I was doing that rough calculation in liters, that's 100,000 liters of water, right? So just as a quick and dirty, we'll say that's about 20,000 gallons at 5 foot deep. So that's a process I would go through, is to try and determine your usage, your catchment. So let's say the pond's full in the winter. After the winter, the pond is full. So when you start using that in April, May for your newly established trees, what's going to feed the pond? Is it coming off a rooftop, or is it coming off of a hard surface? You know,
Honestly, I've got kind of not a swale, but kind of like mounded and mulched beds that are kind of almost spiraling down. So I'm figuring as the water's going to run down on the off contour, we'll just call them a hugel bed. It's going to run down and continue to fill up. So it's down towards the bottom, and it is actually at a key point. So I've got a big knoll in the middle of the design site, and it slopes down and then does kind of break away into about a 5% slope down towards the bottom. So it's coming down off the knoll and just starting to kind of flatten out in that area.
Right. Well, that sounds like a good spot. I would just be thinking about the supply. So what you're on sandy material there. What happens if even we get, you know, an atmospheric river and the soil absorbs it all?
Yeah, that sandy soil is definitely been my nemesis through this whole project.
Yeah. So it's possible. And this is something that I was, I won't say taught, but it was advice that was given to me a long time ago. With any rainwater structure, what if, for instance, a swale never fills? You've gone to all this effort, and the soil is such, like where I live, I have a swale, I have ponds. The ponds are fed from rooftop. The swale is a part of the overflow. And if the swale never gets any water, that's okay. But it does, because there's always overflow from the system I have. But if I was to create a swale where I have it without a pretty consistent supply, I don't think it would in my situation, I don't think it would function the way I had planned it, because the soil where I live we're sandy loam, and it drains very rapidly. Even with 20 years of soil building, it still drains out rapidly. So I get it. It's very exciting to design these structures into your work. It's often a good idea to take a step back and think, okay, is that structure actually going to work, or is it going to just be an empty swale in the landscape? Is it, and part of that is the supply. So if a way around that, of course, is to take water off roads, take water off the proposed house, and sort of direct it into the landscape somehow. If you want to, yeah, it's so if you back up and you think, okay, I'm not sure if this swale is actually going to function, that's where keyline comes in. That's sort of a step back, and it's less obtrusive. You can have water distribution on the site without major rainwater harvesting structures in place. Does that make sense? And I don't want to rain on your parade at all. And looking forward to senior design. And it may work really well. It's just without that given supply, even, here's an example, even if, let's say you had a series of swales and they're off contour like you suggested, and those are sometimes referred to as conveyance swales, and often those are actually compacted because they're there to move water, not for infiltration. Even if you had water going in there, it may be tricky to see it exit at the end and fill your pond. So you may have a pond that receives very little water. So that's one thing about, I know I've talked about it before, that Rubric platform, which is farm design. It's a farm design. I've been involved with learning about last couple of years. It's a very holistic approach to a larger land base, and they will actually take water off of roadways for pond. That's one of the big things, is how you're going to fill your pond. So if you have a road and a conveyance swale beside the road, and the road's on a 1 or 2% grade, all that water is going to make its way into the storage. But it's tricky, but you never know until you try. And I would say, going back to even your soil, the lessons we did on the soils and the infiltration, those might be worth revisiting to see, okay, how quickly did that hole empty when I filled it with water? Was it like 10 minutes, or was it overnight? Or that'll tell you quite a bit. So where I live, I could empty a 1 foot hole, a 1 foot deep hole, probably in 5 minutes. Just boom, gone.
Yeah, I think when I did the soil testing actually right out in that area, it was like 25 minutes for 5 gallons.
Right. So that's pretty quick. Now that's a foot deep, right? But if you go down 2 feet, what happens? Do you hit hard pan?
Well,
do you hit clay? Do you?
It's, at least from this the well drilling reports, it was sand all the way down to, I think the well was drilled at 180 feet, and it was sand all the way to where they stopped drilling.
Wow.
So It's a huge sandbar.
Hmm.
All right. Well, we may have to redesign that pond out of there. I don't want to.
Oh, I get it. Ponds are beautiful. And I think you were on the right path with lining it. That's a very good idea, right? I have to do that here. We're actually going to tear out our pond in the summer and redo it and make, probably going to expand our storage to 50 or 60,000 gallons. And, we want water sovereignty. And our local area here is getting more aggressive with managing or imposing regulations on those people that have wells. And we want to make sure we're not subject to their, especially growing food, right?
Yeah.
You don't. So, and that's what we use it for. It's not for ornamental garden, that's for sure. So I hope I haven't thrown a curveball into your works, but it is all a process. I almost guarantee if you were to finish the course, do your design, and then look at it a few weeks later and start it all over again, you'd probably have different ideas, and that's, it wouldn't be remarkably different, but it would probably change a little. And I find that happens with myself. We'll go through and do a design, and then when we go to execute it on site, we're seeing more smaller details and little changes do come up. So.
And just real quick, I decided to change something in my zone 1. Do you want me to go back to the zone 1 assignment and update it there? I'm just changing a type of plant.
Yeah,
okay.
No, I wouldn't add anything to your workload. Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Carly. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, what I'll do, I'll just show you a few examples that I've got here. How are you doing, Tyler? Do you feel you're gonna be able to push through the last lesson here, or is it gonna be a tough thing to fill given the situation for you?
It's gonna be very difficult to finish.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I found myself in the last 2 weeks while here attempting to make my portfolio look nice without absorbing information, and kind of realize like, oh, that's not my style. I took this class to learn, and I am not overly concerned with acquiring the certificate and more concerned with understanding the information.
Right on. Well,
Yeah.
that's a great approach. And again, you got lifetime access to the course, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And, honestly, these are my experiences it's the beginning.
Yeah.
And the learning just it continues with doing,
Mm-hmm.
And looking for other educational experiences that really appeal to you. And, you've got a unique site there, and I'm sure it will evolve over time, right? As all of them do, but I seem to remember you have a nice water resource there that's going through your property. And
yeah, it's very sparse when it's coming through. It's kind of this drainage, the seasonal creek that comes through, and I've been there for 3 years now. It's the first year that I was there. It was very, very present. A lot of life going on near that area. Lots of frogs, and these last 2 years have been drought years, and they've been much less present. So I want to be able to really slow that down.
Right.
And that area down where it flows is below my structure as well. And the structure I live in is probably built in 1900. And it's very much not to code. And there's all this, when I moved there, a majority of the gray water was just flowing off of the property out into the back area, not going anywhere, just eroding things. And so I'm learning to, finding the best way to be able to mitigate that.
Right.
It's a problem. And, but also it's not necessarily the worst problem, because the work that's going to be required to be able to make it usable is going to be pretty small. And so I appreciate that. And yeah, working on building the soil down there, because it is very sandy where I am as well. Yeah, and I learned that pretty quickly when I was doing the soil testing at home. It drained in less than 10 minutes. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. Right on.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know what you're starting with, right?
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, good for you,
Thank you.
for identifying that, that basically low hanging fruit that you can put some energy into and get a good return on it.
Yeah.
And gray water is one of them, might as well, it's, you've got it going out onto the landscape, you might as well refine it a little and make the best use of it. Just be, and I'm sure you know this, just be mindful you're not, sending that into annual vegetables.
Yeah. I'd like to make, I'd like to send it down below, and where that watershed drainage is, plant food forest and just like a perennial orchard. I think that'd be a great place for it. And keep the annuals up above where it's in zone 1, right, where I can walk outside and take care of things, and below have it be kind of this passive watering system and have a nice little like fruit tree guild going on.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great idea. Well, I know where I live, it's in our building code, allowable, which is wonderful, but you can't store it. It would turn into something quite nasty quite quickly if you're storing. But in British Columbia here, we have to deliver it below ground. So it can't be any above ground spray. But that's pretty easy to work around with drip irrigation. And so, yeah, I hope you have a good, some success with that. And there's a lot of resources when it comes to gray water that you could look at, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about it. And learn about plants, that's one of the overwhelming things to me right now. It's just plants.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I spent the first decade of my working career just focused on plant knowledge. And it took that long to learn a pretty good palette of plants that we work with in this part of the world, but there's always something new. It just never ends. And that's a great part of the job. There's always new plants to play with. And so it's an ongoing thing. Yeah. So there are some apps out there that help, but I've never used them, and they don't really appeal to me. I guess I'm old school and have a library full of books, and that's how I used to just sit and read every night. And I was lucky I was working in a couple of park-like settings where all the plants were labeled. So that was extremely helpful rather than asking people what they were. So, yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking with our last few minutes here, I would just I'd show you a couple of design projects that we had done. And they're going to be different than what you have been asked to produce. And that is one of the nice things about going through this course and having the template file. You have a starting point for any new projects you want to do, and you may decide, well, like there's no way that we would take that template file and use it as a template for our work. It's just too deep, you know, it's extremely deep in terms of some of the information that's being asked for. And the cost for us to do it would just, it would be pretty extreme. So let me show you what we've, uh-oh, my computer's misbehaving here. There we go. So I'll just show you here what we kind of distill our work into, and it's by no means you know, right or wrong. It's just what it works for us. So and that's one thing. If you go to that the module section, and you look at all of, there's four of the instructors have their process video there with their process design process from beginning to end. It's fascinating to look at everybody's process and just see what works for them. And again, everybody has a different approach, but the main thing is to provide value for your clientele or yourself if that's who you're doing this for. So in this example, this is an urban site. We had a survey done. You can see there's all these existing trees, and we have contour lines and the building footprint, existing patio and walls and stuff. And then we have this sector map. So this is how we would do our sector analysis. And this is one of the first things that we show our clients and get feedback from them before we proceed any further, because we would definitely want to make sure that we're covering this off before we put some ideas to paper. And then what we do after that is we jump right into the water layer, where we're looking at all that on-site water resource and what we're going to do with that. In this example, we're taking water off of the roof and the patios, and we're sending them into a rain garden. And we put a little example of what a rain garden might look like, and some numbers, some catchment numbers, what's coming off the roof, based on our annual average rainfall, which is around 1,100 millimeters per year. And we're showing all the impervious surfaces here, as well as a micro watershed. So this is a Google Earth image with that I got contour information, and we could track just how much water flows from uphill behind the site. And it's very interesting because we have been on that site for a couple of years now doing different phases of work. And there is a huge volume of water that flows along this hardpan layer that's about 3 feet deep that we encountered when we were building walls in the back here. So it is a substantial volume, and fortunately we have planned that and are making use of it. So the next thing we look at is access, and that is kind of we've taken that from the Agrarian platform where there's 10 or 11 different layers, but access is a biggie. So that is foot traffic patterns. That's for us, that's patios. You can see there was an existing railway tie retaining walls here that we're going to remove and put in a new patio with some plantings. Not a huge change, just expanding it a little bit. And then we have a little 3D image here of it, and then some notes. And then you can see here we have revision notes. So we presented that, and then we've revised it a little bit based on feedback. And then we get to the soil layer, which is all that living material. And these with this wall, we're planning to soften it from behind and in front. Uh-oh. I'm just going to bring up a couple of pictures of that. I can find out. Okay, we'll let that load while we're looking at this. So yeah, this is just looking at soil. And when I say soil, that's all living things. So these are intentionally planted areas. This is turf. It's an enclosed veggie garden. And then this is the rain garden, and then another bed here. Now this changed a little bit. And then there's our planting plan, where we specifically identify each and every individual plant that's going on the drawing. And then we have plant lists on both sides. This is for the front. This is for the rear of the property. And so now, if we back up a little bit, I didn't include one critical part, which is the concept. The concept would be this minus these specific plants. And that's where your drawings are going to be stopping. But if you were to continue along with them, you would want to dive into details, right? And the details in this case are a full planting plan. I'm not going to really dive into specifics there. This is an interesting thing we do, is we separate, give people an idea of the tree and shrub component versus the herbaceous perennial component. So we get an idea of what proportions are there. And then we've add details about the wall. So you can see this is a side view of the proposed retaining wall and how that's built and the height. So we're going to max it out at about 3'10", and that's the maximum height that we could go without needing any engineering. And this is an Allen block wall, so it's pre-engineered, which is great. So we know we don't have to get too worried about the specifics here, other than following recommended manufacturer's recommendations. And then we did an enclosed vegetable garden. So that was on a slope. We had to figure out how that was going to look. So we did some details for that. Then we changed the front, and the rain garden got pushed downhill. So we just did this quick sheet that we printed. We're right in the middle of creating this now. That'll be tomorrow. And then a little detail on our rain garden. There's a side view. And while we were excavating this rain garden, we encountered the soils we expected until we got to the very bottom, and we hit a clay layer, which is exactly what you don't want with a rain garden. Maybe for a pond, but not a rain garden. We want that water to infiltrate. So we had to add in a little a drain network there, just so in the winter we are able to allow water to flow out of that rain garden and not create a big mess. And then here's a few details on the side of the property where the clients want to put a spa and extend this patio. And we've just slapped together basically a few details for that. And let me just show you. Okay, I'll just go through a couple site pictures here. That is the wall. That's a year, so this is less than a year later after planting, and we're getting this, these cardoons are doing really well, getting a lot of good response out of the landscape. The veggie garden up here, lots of deer visitation on this site. let me just take a look here. So here is our here's our rain garden. And because it was on a slope, it's a little bit tricky, much like a pond, Carly, where the rain garden itself has to be flat. And if it's sloped, we had to retain the top portion of it. And the flooding height of this will be basically the base of the stones. So when we get a big rain event, water is going to come up and pool here. Now that is, and we put perforated pipe and some gravel in place. And then we put fabric over that gravel to preserve it. We don't want to have soils intermingling with our drainage. And this is a clean out that we're putting at the end, that you won't see that. And then we got topsoil in. Let me just see. Yeah, and if you're ever putting soil in an area and you have the right access, this is a wonderful way of doing it. A slinger truck, they're expensive, but this is a bed at the top here that we wanted to, that the owner had to mow and did not like, so we're vegetating that. This is kind of where we got, not quite done, but you can see all our irrigations in place. The rain garden has soil in it. So we excavate the rain garden. Go back here to allow for a foot of soil at least in the bottom of it. And then we account for 6 inches of pooling height. So if there's a big rain event and it fills up and that soil is at capacity, the water will come up 6 inches above it. And then we have a an overflow built in. I'm not sure if, there it is. So we have an overflow, which is a little catch basin here. And we also have an overland overflow that's going right into a ditch over here. So that if for some reason this fails, the water's still got somewhere to go. And of course, this is all in a very rough state, and we'll be updating. I don't think that's a bit of a blurry picture, but that's kind of where we were at. So that's our backfill at the rain garden. And then this is kind of that zone 1, the bottom. And zone 2 will be on this edge. And then we have a big planting back here that is yet to have soil put on it. And I think that's about it for, but here you go. Here's where we started. This vegetated area. And then we place some of that turf that we stripped off. We put it back up on the bank and actually flipped it upside down because we wanted to retain as much soil life as possible. And then we ran our irrigation in here before adding topsoil. So that's kind of the process we go through. I don't think there's anything else in here that's too exciting right now. We've got it planted now. I don't have any pictures in here of that, but yeah. So I do have one other example to show you, and it is far less complicated. Maybe we'll just quickly do that and then call her a day. So here is a drawing we did for a young couple in an urban site. And much like the previous one, we are, oops. We start with the sector analysis, and we determine And you'll also note, some of you will get a kick out of this. I'm not north up here. I'm just a few degrees off of it, but then we do our water layer where we're identifying some impervious surfaces and what we're going to do here. So here we're actually putting a little swale at the top of the property, and then it's going to overflow into a rain garden. As well, we have an outdoor patio that's got a covered area and some liquid tote containers for collecting rainwater off the roof. And then that'll overflow into this small rain garden as well. This is the access. So we have a patio and a walkway and the roofing here. And then this is the overall concept. Oh, sorry, this is soil layer. So this is with all the plants added, and then we get to the concept itself. So this is the broad view of it. And this is, basically going to be a very productive edible landscape for these people. And then a couple of more details where we had a full planting plan with a planting list, and then some details with their patio, the pergola, the roofing, and then a little bit about their rain garden. So yeah, so that is about it for that. Does anybody have any questions to wrap up today with, or are we feeling pretty good about this last lesson? I guess we're all good. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for taking time today to join me and go through lesson number 10. I wish you best of luck with your designs, wrapping up the course, and it's been a real pleasure working with all of you. And the 20 weeks goes by very quickly, and be very interesting to hear how things go for everybody from this point onward. But I'll send out a note at the end of the class with my contact info and stuff. And if anybody wants to share anything beyond the class, be happy to do so. And yeah, so thank you again, and best of luck with your assignments. I'm really looking forward to seeing them next week, and we'll be giving you lots of feedback.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, no problem, Lola.
It's been really nice working with you.
Yeah, well, it's exciting to work with everybody and just see all the variety that everybody's encountering, including yourself. You're in a very interesting part of the world and a new home, so you've got lots of new things happening in your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you very much again, and best of luck to everybody. We'll look forward to seeing your assignments next week. So take care.
Right.
Yeah.
Bye, Jamie.
Bye-bye.